The start of Death Stranding is a horrible experience, because both the gameplay and the narrative sucks at the start. The game is incredibly bad at teaching the player game mechanics. The gimmicky balance system eviscerates any joy of traversing the fantastic environments. The player is required to push through 10 hours of shallow gameplay with game mechanics that are poorly explained and that are painful to interact with. The story is even worse. The world building is inconsistent and full of logical failures. The characters are poorly written with incredibly unnatural dialogue. It is in practice impossible to understand and follow the plot because it is just nonsense and full of plot holes. Having said that, Death Stranding probably has the best environmental design I have ever experienced in a game. When this part of the gameplay works, the experience can be fantastic. It is really satisfying to build infrastructure such as roads to make traversal easier on subsequent journeys. When the game allows you to just go on a journey and exist in an environment in peace, the experience is legitimately good. The production value is also really high. The visuals are great, the music and audio are fantastic, the atmosphere is solid. In short, the artistic vision is pretty good. Death Stranding is at its best when it is focused on being art. The actors deliver solid performances, which helps hide the worst of the writing as well. But Death Stranding is a very flawed game. Poor communication and a shit gimmick in the balance system are the main reasons the gameplay sucks in the early game. The gameplay gets better after about 10 hours when you either grow used to the systems or get upgrades that fix the worst of the problems. When the gameplay works, it can be pretty relaxing and enjoyable to interact with. The writing and the narrative is honestly never good, but the production value can carry some of the cutscenes. The fundamental problem with Death Stranding is anything that distracts from the game as a piece of art. Let's start with a discussion of why the gameplay in the early part suck, and more specifically how poor the game is at teaching the player game mechanics. Death Stranding teaches the player mechanics mainly through pop-up text messages. Let's use the message that explains the way terminals work as an example. The message states, X equals hold down. When you see the X icon, you will need to hold down X. Try holding it down until the delivery terminal responds. Note that you will also need to hold down buttons other than X. For example, when you see the left button icon, you will need to hold down the left button. You understand the immediate context, that you need to hold down the button X to access the terminal. But did you catch the implicit meaning of the symbols? Did you catch the main point of this message? The information can be distilled down to a single sentence. When there is a circle around an icon, hold down the corresponding button. I would say that this single sentence is easier to understand. You get the point that the circle means press down for any button, and I missed that the first time. The tutorial text boxes are usually poorly written. They have too much unnecessary information and often fails to inform you of the main point. The message that pops up after I fall over has the same issues. A lot of information which could easily have been written more efficiently. What is even an impact band in the first place? I don't know, the game doesn't tell me. The point is that it is hard to understand what the developers are trying to teach you. It is hard to grasp the point because of bad writing. On top of that, a lot of these messages pop up at times you're busy with something else and can't pay attention to them. The example here shows a message that tries to teach me something, but I'm busy in a combat encounter. I'm not reading that message. And when I'm done with the combat, the message is gone forever. I lost the information. The messages often appears when I don't need the information either, and I forgot about it. The message about using cargoes as a weapon, for example. I completely forgot that this mechanic existed until I went over the footage later. It was not relevant at the time and I forgot about it. Most of these tutorials are only text, and rarely introduces you to mechanics by showing you through gameplay. There are exceptions, but usually you need to memorize these text boxes to get any use out of them. I hope my point comes across. These messages are poorly implemented, poorly written, and when they are the main way you're taught about mechanics, that is a colossal issue. Eventually you learn the mechanics through trial and error, of course, but it is much more painful than it should have been. The mechanics are really not that complicated or hard to teach. Another huge problem with Death Stranding is menus. They are poorly designed, with a lot of unnecessary submenus and clicks. Menus and interfaces are painful and slow to navigate. During my playthrough I built several roads. To do that I needed resources, which I got from raiding mule camps. The problem with getting resources from these camps is that they are a pain to transport over long distances. To make it easier to transport, I wanted to convert the smaller size containers to 800 size containers, all of which takes up the same amount of space on a bike or on Sam's back. The smaller containers needed to be recycled at a facility first. The facility in question can only hold 1500 ceramics. 800 divided by 1500 is less than 2, which means I only get a single container every time I recycle materials at this location. This limit of 1500 is only there to make reclaiming a pain in the ass. I can store unlimited amounts of materials in my private storage after all. This entire process is just painful and frustrating for no reason. The menus could have been a lot cleaner and better at communication in terms of information as well. Excess ceramic is marked in red, but it does not state how much excess, or which container contributes to the excess. You have to remove containers until it is fine and you don't have any excess anymore. Adding containers when they only contribute to excess should be impossible in the first place. This entire process of recycling and reclaiming materials is convoluted. In a good menu, this would take seconds instead of 5 minutes. Interacting with the menus is a chore and a slog most of the time. When I delivered these resources to the road I was building, I missed some resources to complete it. The menu states how much I have contributed to the road versus how much is required. It does not tell you how much it remains to complete the road. You have to do the math yourself. Of course, that is not that difficult, but it would be a nice quality of life feature if the game did the math for you and just stated this directly in the menu. To finish my road, I returned to the closest storage facility to collect more materials. When I was reclaiming materials, I forgot the exact amount I needed. To figure that out, I needed to exit the reclaiming menu and look at the map and do the math again, instead of using the inbuilt map in the reclaiming menu to get the same information. Having the option of looking at the relevant build menus and storage sites from the reclaiming menu would have been a really nice quality of life feature. Eventually I realized I did not have enough materials at the storage site to complete the build, but I might have enough if I combined the materials I was carrying with the materials on site. But the reclaiming menu does not give you the information of how much you're carrying. You have to exit the menu and check your cargo menu to get that information. Having access to this information directly from the reclaiming materials menu is another quality of life feature that would have been really nice to have. None of these issues or complaints are game breaking, but every single one of them add friction to the game. They make the game more frustrating and annoying to interact with. It takes more time to do simple actions because of inefficient and poorly designed menus. It takes more time to figure out information because of a bad interface. Like the game mechanics, you get used to the menus. Like the game mechanics, this issue is the biggest at its start, even if it is frustrating throughout the game. Controlling Sam can feel a bit off, especially at the start. Sam has a lot of inertia and some unnatural control schemes. Sam feels clunky, for lack of a better word. You grow used to the clunky movement for the most part though, but it can be off-putting at the beginning. The most frustrating part, and perhaps the defining feature of gameplay in Death Stranding, is the balancing gimmick, and I do think it is a gimmick in the early game. It is obnoxious as a mechanic. In practice, it is a constant quick-time event you need to focus on. It distracts you from the beautiful environments, the art, the story, and the pop-up messages that teach you the game. It is not hard to deal with, it is just a chore you constantly need to engage with. This chore is the focal point of the gameplay in the early game. The mechanic gets more pronounced when you carry more stuff, which means you don't want to deliver packages, you don't want to complete optional orders, you don't want to pick up lost packages, you don't want to bring equipment with you to traverse the environment. This single balancing mechanic works against the core aspect of the gameplay, which is the journey. This is the reason you don't find it fun to deliver packages or traverse the environment in the first 10 hours, because it is a pain in the fucking ass to interact with this balancing mechanic. It creates a chore gameplay loop. When you unlock the exoskeleton, about 80% of the problems disappear from this mechanic. As you progress, you also get upgrades through likes and more tools to help you carry more stuff without making the balance issue worse. Suddenly you can deliver packages and traverse the environment without having to engage with a constant spam of aggressive quicktime events. The mechanic makes sense to engage with when you as a player choose a bad path. You walk over a rock and stumble and need to catch yourself. You choose a steep path and need to steady yourself. The mechanic works at this point because it is much more limited. It is an addition to the journey and not the core mechanic everything else revolves around. And that is the problem in the early game. The balancing mechanic is the core gameplay instead of the journey. I can see how the gameplay mechanic wants to emulate the feeling of wearing a backpack in real life. By holding the buttons on a controller, you activate the same muscles as you do when you hold the straps on a heavy backpack. But that is the definition of a gimmick, something that is cool or interesting on first sight, but that has a lot of negative consequences for the rest of the experience. This would be a fine thing to have as a gimmick for an hour or two, and then get rid of it after that. In summary, the gameplay in the early part of Death Stranding absolutely sucks. There are few redeeming features. It is a chore to interact with almost everything. On top of that, gameplay is poorly taught and explained. There are so many little things that adds up to create a miserable experience. That leaves the narrative to carry the early parts of the game. And frankly, I think the narrative is poorly written. Writing in this context means fictional writing. In general, fictional writing works by creating a setting. The setting is the foundation for every fictional story, and the setting is in practice world building in this context. It is in this world that the characters exist, and the characters behave in a certain way to drive a plot forward. Stuff happens because characters do something in the world they inhabit. When a story works, we as an audience connect to the world, the plot, the characters and so forth at an emotional or intellectual level. It is difficult to connect to the story of Death Stranding though, which is sort of ironic considering the heavy theme of connection in the story. The narrative feels like a first draft in a bullet point style. World building and dialogue are the primary problems, and I will come back to them shortly. Death Stranding has a very high production value though, and that carries most of the story in the moment to moment. The visuals and audio creates fantastic atmospheres and has the ability to tug on emotions by themselves. The great acting adds a lot of subtext to the story through their performances. And the cutscene you see in the background is pretty good in terms of acting, visuals and sound, but there is no depth to this story. Scenes like this are satisfying from a purely sensory perspective and as small isolated narrative moments. The narrative does not work outside of these small moment-to-moment experiences though. And let's start with the problems with the world building. The issue with the world building in Death Stranding is that the world does not take itself seriously. The rules that govern the world are not taken seriously. For example, when someone dies in this world, they go nuclear after 2 days. The concept itself is cool, but the consequences this leads to are not taken seriously. We are introduced to this concept in the scene you see in the background. They barely caught the death in time and need to burn the body to prevent it from going nuclear. What is worrying is that this death was unexpected and it took them 2 days to detect it. Which is insane when you consider the implications of a dead body going nuclear after 2 days. In this world, detecting when someone dies is the single most important thing in the world. If you don't do that, your city or society will blow up. You absolutely need to catch the dead body and burn it. The problem is that there are a lot of ways a person can die before their time or unexpectedly. People can flat out die unexpectedly out of nowhere. That happens, unfortunately. If that person happened to be alone and not supposed to check in with others for a few days, then suddenly, boom goes the city. That is a pretty innocent example. But what if someone wants to harm or destroy the city? How hard is it to hide a body, your own or another corpse, inside a city and make it hard to get to it? When a time limit is 2 days, I would say not very hard. What this leads to is a necessity to have complete surveillance over most locations of a city to always know exactly where everyone is at all times. The very survival of your city and society hinges on the ability to do so. Which is why the scene in the background falls short for me. It does not make sense given the premise laid out. The story does not respect the consequences of the world's rules, which makes the story and the world feel artificial and fake. The point of this scene is to introduce the player to bridge babies, BTs, voidouts, Sam's ability and Higgs. It does that, but at the cost of world building. This sequence ends up by blowing up the incinerator you were heading to in a void. The next mission is another corpse disposal mission, but this time you are alone. You need to trek into the mountains to get to another incinerator to burn the body. This is a fine premise and it makes sense. The scale of the incinerator does not make sense though when you consider where it is and the lack of infrastructure. This incinerator is massive, which begs the question, how did they construct it? How did the people of this world manage to get this amount of resources up into the mountains without good infrastructure? How are they getting bodies up here after they have built it? It all seems extremely inconvenient and poorly thought out if you are an inhabitant of this world. The answer is obviously that this is cool, it is atmospheric, but in terms of world building, immersion and in-world logic it is nonsense. I could probably fill several hours of footage with examples of bad world building, plot holes and nonsense, but I trust that you get the point. The world building is shallow. The very foundation of the story is bad. Characters are built based on the world they inhabit, which means that a flawed world cascades to flawed characters. A character's motivation is based on their experiences in the world they exist in. The drive force of a character is based on a fake and artificial world. This is a fundamental flaw you can't get around. The bigger issue for Death Stranding is the dialogue though, which is horrendous. It is incredibly unnatural, with bad pacing, poor transitions, and in general odd human behavior. For some reason Sam has a tendency to be pretty mute, often ending up as a receiver of a monologue. Problems with dialogue is the best showcased through examples. I'm going to play a clip without talking over it, which will last for about 30 seconds, and I want you to pay attention to the very unnatural way they speak.
My mother may be gone, but I'm here. And you, Sam, you're here too.
Been 10 years since you saw each other, right? And in all that time, she hasn't aged a day.
He knows why. My body's still on the beach. I don't get to grow older.
This is a great example of bad writing. It is an unnatural way of speaking and a bad way to do exposition. My mother may be gone, but I'm here. Implies that she's here for a purpose. I'm here to continue her work. I'm here to finish what she started. Instead of stating her purpose, she continues with, and you, Sam, you're here too. Which also implies that Sam is here for a purpose. The only reason to state the obvious fact that Sam and Emily are here is to make a point out of it, to point out why they are here. That is not stated. Instead, Die Hardman randomly interrupts with, been 10 years since you saw each other, right? And in all that time she hasn't aged a day. To which Sam should be thinking, thank you, Captain Obvious, I can see that. What is your bloody point? Obviously, this is just Hideo Kojima speaking to the player and informing them that Emily does not age. Emily continues the explanation of why she does not age. He knows why. My body is still on the beach. I don't get to grow older. This is Hideo Kojima speaking to the player through Emily. The fact that Emily does not age is not relevant for the current plotline at the current time. It could easily have been skipped in this conversation. If this piece of information happened to be critical though, to the current time, there are so many better ways of sneaking that into a conversation. Sam can just remark on how unnerving it is that Emily does not age. He could ask questions about how she is doing, considering she's stuck on the beach. You can have Sam incorporate the exposition into natural language. This entire sequence reads like a list of bullet points that needs to be in this conversation. Emily needs to be in the conversation. Sam needs to be in the conversation. Emily does not age. Emily is stuck on the beach.
You're here.
This is basically the structure of dialogue in Death Stranding. Dialogue feels like it is written by the usage of bullet points primarily. In Act 3, Sam delivers a package to the crafter. The crafter is supposed to join in the chiral network and the UCA. He delivers a monologue on why, but at the end of this monologue he concludes that the UCA is not that bad after all, and if you just fetch some stuff for him he will join. His train of thought or logic makes sense when you think about it. But the execution or writing to get there is really bad. I will play the clip without me talking over it. Pay attention to the transitions between the sentences.
What's your angle anyway? Only a damn fool would trust that terrorist to deliver shit now. But here you are, filling in. Keeping her business alive for her, am I right? I swear. Can't trust anyone these days. Don't try sweet-talking me onto your little network. You know why there's been so many terrorist attacks recently? Because you all pissed them off with your talk of reuniting the country. Join the UCA. I may as well paint a bullseye on my shelter. Just keep my deliveries coming. We'll get along just fine. I don't need any trouble. Though I will say, I appreciate these hematic grenades of yours. Quality work, gotta admit. Not the sort of equipment the UCA ought to keep to itself. There's a lot of freelance porters operating in these parts, after all. If I could churn these out by the boatload and gear up those folks. Now you're good people. I can see that. And you brought my order like I asked. But it'll take more than that for me to agree to what you're asking. Chiral Network is a big step. But if you could prove to me Bridges is an organization I can trust... Well, how about this? Do another run for me. I'll put the details on the terminal there.
The problem with this monologue is that it is a monologue. Sam needs to respond to him. Sam needs to address and alleviate the craftsman's fear over terrorists and being targeted. Sam needs to point out how the UCA helps people. Sam needs to ask him if there is anything the UCA or Sam can do to prove to him that they can be trusted. The guy needs a lot of reassurance and Sam needs to provide that. The craftsman cannot provide his own reassurance, that is not how human beings work. This entire monologue is sensible in terms of an outline of how the conversation should go. It makes sense, it really does. The problem is that Hideo Kojima seems to have skipped the actual work that goes into crafting functional dialogue. The annoying parts and he as an author needs to write for things to make sense, even though it is not the fun or exciting part of writing. It still needs to be done. This is the prevalent issue with Death Stranding in terms of dialogue. The author seems to be mostly interested in writing the outline of the dialogue, but seems to completely ignore the actual work needed to make that outline work in practice, to make the humans feel real and functional. I think Death Stranding tries to create a compelling narrative, and I think it fails primarily due to bad world building and badly written dialogues. The game succeeds at creating raw emotions by utilizing visuals and audio. Art, in other words. An emotional response created through our senses. The atmosphere of the game evokes emotions through visuals and audio elements. The traversal of the beautiful environment can be a wonderful experience. Putting an unborn baby in a container and strapping the container to your stomach can be shocking or unnerving. The bridge baby is weird for the sake of being weird, because that is the artistic intention or vision in order to provoke emotions. The best way to look at Death Stranding is to look at it as art. The story and gameplay is mostly a container for that art and emotions created by that art. When the game works, it works because of the audio and visual elements primarily. The environment evokes emotions through great visuals and audio. The cutscenes can be bizarre and gripping because of visuals and music. Everything this game succeeds at is directly linked to emotions created through visual and audio impressions. The problem is that Death Stranding tries to be more than just art. It tries to create good gameplay and a gripping story as well, which it fails at in the ways I've discussed in this video. When the gameplay and narrative turns confusing, frustrating and annoying, it is harder for the artistic side of the game to succeed. It hurts the game that it sucks at storytelling. It hurts the game that it is bad at teaching. It hurts the game that the menus and interfaces suck. It hurts the game that the control scheme can be experienced as rage-inducing. Because every single one of these frustration points pushes the player further away from the emotional state they need to be in order to enjoy the art. I hope that this video managed to convey what Death Stranding is trying to do and why I think it has a lot of problems. I hope you understand why people like the game and why people bounce off the early game as well. Leave some comments if you have some thoughts on the game or the video. I usually read everything even if I don't respond. Thank you for watching.